Welcome friends, this is T again with another reaction video, and today we're going to be doing a reaction on Candice Owens. She's at the time with PragerU, and she's talking about slavery and the fact that white people didn't invent slavery. Now this seemed to be a big subject, especially these days. You wouldn't think after all these years we would be past a lot of these things, but obviously we're not, because it seemed to be getting worse. But she's talking about how white people didn't invent it. Yes, they were involved in it, but not invented it. And it wasn't just white people having the practice of slavery. It was all over the place. And I'm seeing a lot of black people viewing this particular video, so I decided to go ahead and do a reaction to it myself and give you a little bit of commentary on what I think. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this reaction. But before we do, please like, subscribe, and share this video, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. That way you know whenever we come out with new videos. Okay, all right, let's get with it.
And now for a brief history of slavery. Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown. It existed before then. It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact, when the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner.
Yeah, when I was young, I did believe that slavery started with white people in Africa, but as I got older, I started to learn that wasn't the case, because too many documentaries and history channels that talked about slavery in other places. So you would think most black people would catch on to that after a while. I mean, I get it. You're going to be deceived from a certain point, but after a while watching TV and looking up things, because people love to look up stuff a lot, and watching history channels and reading stories, you would think at some point they would say, wait a minute, slavery did start in other places. So this thing where it's only started with white people and white people just went around the world and enslaved everybody, I don't believe that was true. But you would think that would be common sense right there after you start to get older and understand how the world works. And the fact that they was eating folks, ooh.
Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural. The slave-master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day. Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago.
Now, see, I know about that. I mentioned before in my videos that I am Christian, and part of being Christian is reading the Bible, the New Testament and the Old Testament, and the Hebrews were captured by the Egyptians and put in slaves. I believe it was 400 years, I believe. I don't know, I believe it was a punishment of Israel's disobedience. I'm not exactly sure. You can, if you're a Christian and you know the Bible better than me, you can put it in the comments to be more specific. But yeah, they had slavery back then. So that was way before slavery happened in Africa. So it was happening all over the world. I mean, as long as there are people that are at the top and people that are at the bottom, there's always that possibility for slavery. There's always that possibility the richer people are going to take advantage of the poorer people. It's always been that way. It's just not white people. White people ain't just, one day decided, hey, let's have slaves. It was one of those things where it was just happening anyway. I mean, you could go way back. I don't know if it started at the beginning of the world, but you can go way, way back and see that it was slavery. And also, a lot of the time, it was just indentured servants, where people will volunteer to be a slave or volunteer to be a servant so they can feed their families. So it wasn't always people being captured. It was something, a situation where people were starving or they couldn't feed their families and they needed money. So they decided to, hey, I'll work for you. I'll be your servant and get paid for it and feed my family. So it won't always people being captured. But I noticed one thing is people that don't believe in God or believe in the Bible, they tend to say that God justified slavery, that he wanted slavery, that he thought slavery was a good thing. No, God understood how men are. Men will take advantage of another human being. That's the way we are. We are sinners. We do that kind of thing. So God made rules like, look, if you're gonna have a servant, you ought to treat them in a certain way. You are not to abuse them. You are not to treat them like garbage. You are to give them what they earn so they can feed their families. And at a certain point, I believe you had to release them. I don't know, for like 7 years. After, if you owed money to somebody, you become their indentured servant. So you had to work off that thing for 7 years. It wasn't a lifetime thing. And I think that's probably the issue when it comes down to, America and the Africans. They kept them and they breeded them and things like that. It was a lot of cruelty that happened. But blacks became American. And that was the benefit that happens. Because, like I said, they were doing slavery in a lot of these other places, and it was a lot worse. From my understanding, it's still bad. But, it's like at least we were able to stay in America. Yeah, of course, black people suffered. I'm not trying to take away from that. But I'm just saying that I'm sure a lot of people that are living in America now that's black, they're happy they're living in America. I mean, that could be an argument right now because of what's going on right now. But in general sense, it's a lot worse than a lot of other places. And a lot of times we tend to forget that we are more in a privileged position than we think. I sometimes do.
As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were quickly followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution. I
think that's the hardest part for blacks to accept. We like to blame white people for slavery, but we don't want to accept the fact that white people is the one that pretty much put a stop on it. I mean, maybe not completely, but other cultures won't try to put a stop to it. From my understanding, I think it's still happening. So, and the fact that they stopped slavery, I mean, that's inconceivable, especially with a lot of these race hustlers running around talking about, slavery, is still the way it was. Now, they found, don't get me wrong, they found different ways to get indentured servants, like paying you practically nothing and working you to death. But they're not just doing black people that way, they're doing white people that way too. White people are going through it. So it's not like, it's one of those greed things. They just greedy. And slavery is a business in some ways when you look at it. It's all about making money, and paying out as little as possible, if nothing. So, I mean, look at sweatshops and all these other things that a lot of these big companies use. But nobody complain about that. As long as they can get their tennis shoes, as long as they can get their outfits, they don't care then. But they care so much about what happened 400 years ago. Not saying that we shouldn't learn about these things, but to live your life thinking about these things on a daily basis is crazy.
Centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice. That includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War. Now, am I saying
Now that's brutal. I heard. I mean, just imagine getting hit with a cannonball, man. That was a brutal war. A lot of white people died during that war. Now, I'm not saying they were trying to do it for black people. I'm not saying that. Maybe some might have been. Some might have just, because a lot of people that join war don't want to join a war. Some people do. Some people will voluntarily go to war because they believe in their country or they believe in something. So most people don't want to go to war, and maybe a lot of these soldiers were forced to go. But some of them, I believe, thought it was the right thing to do. And either way, they got killed regardless. And they got killed for black people to be free. But, for some reason, a lot of these race hustlers always want to forget these things. They don't want to mention that. It's almost they don't want any white people to be good. Yes, are there evil white people in the world? Yes. But there are also people that are decent. But they don't want to talk about those people. They want to basically say all white people are just evil and want us in slavery. And then you got white people constantly apologizing and trying to prove that they're not racist, which they don't have to live that way. It's crazy to even fathom that they would to think that they got to constantly prove to black people that they aren't racist. I'm not asking them to do that. I don't think most black people are. Just treat us decently like you would treat anybody else. That's all we want, because we want to treat you decent as well. But like I said, there's a lot of race hustlers out there that just want to paint that picture that, all white people are just out to get you constantly. Like I said, I heard a lot of that when I was young, so they put that fear in your heart for some reason. And then other people are able to take advantage of that fear.
That this makes white people better than anyone else? Of course not. My purpose here is to simply tell the truth, and the truth is that human history is complicated. No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless. Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous Persian Empire or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America or the heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few. Instead, we're told that slavery is a white phenomenon. And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media,
that's what I was taught when I was a kid, constantly. Watch out for white people. They're dangerous. They always out to get you constantly. So whenever I ran into white people, I always thought they were up to something. They drilled this in your mind. It's not just outside people, too. It's people within your family that does it, too. I mentioned in one of my videos, my older sister only wanted me to marry a black woman. Like, I didn't have no other choice but that, because I seen a lot of my relatives that really couldn't stand white folks, but they never got into, other than the slavery thing that happened years ago, they never got into no real details of why. You could say whatever they say. They could say, well, white people aren't trustworthy. You can say that about anybody, any race. It wasn't no real reason to hate white people. And unfortunately, I saw this in a lot of black churches, because even though they go to worship God and they talk about God, how much they love God, and God said love everybody, but they still hated white people. So this thing was like drilled into your head that slavery that happened in Africa, from Africa and America, was the only slavery that was going on. And we should just hold white people accountable for the whole world. The whole world being bad. I ain't saying they didn't contribute to it, but who hasn't? Everybody contribute to why the world is going the way it is. Some might be more than others, but it happens. But yeah, when I was young, it was constantly drilled. And even when they were forcing us to watch Roots, and that was an inaccurate show. And what got me about that movie was they lied about a lot of things in that movie now. I believed a lot of that stuff when I watched Roots. It was almost like they were like pushing this propaganda even back then, man. So I'm sure they were doing it for a long time.
Come across extraordinary depictions about how Africans lived like pharaohs before Europeans came and laid waste to their paradise.
Yeah, they always said, making it seem like, it was queens back then, and it probably was the kings or whatever, leaders. But they tried to make it seem like there wasn't no savagery going on. There wasn't no groups going against each other, murdering each other, and all kind of crazy stuff. That happened in probably every country back then. And they also had slavery, I believe, too, as well. So it's like, but they trying to make it seem like, I don't know how it was back in Africa. I mean, I'm sure I can do some research, but I'm sure it wasn't perfect. And I'm sure probably it was a lot of killing, it was a lot of greed, it was a lot of, perverted things happening, just like any other country. So, as beautiful as Africa is, I'm not going to try to pretend like it's a paradise.
I wish any of this were true, but it's not. It's fantasy. The truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other black Africans, and in many cases, sold for items as trivial as gin and mirrors.
Yeah, that's crazy for alcohol. But that seemed to be the thing with the Europeans, man, back in the day, man. They used to come with alcohol, boy. When that's what happened to the American Indians, man. It was like, now it's like a lot of them are alcoholics or whatever. They would like bring alcohol. That seemed to be the killer thing. And alcohol is poison when you really think about it. It's really poison. So when you introduce stuff like this, and I believe in like World War I or World War II, they would like growing poppy seeds and drugs. They were selling it to people and getting people addicted. That seemed to be the thing, man. If you want to take over a country, instead of just going there trying to blow things up or kill people, just give them alcohol or drugs, man. They usually do it. But the mirror thing kind of took me by surprise. I'm assuming there were no mirrors back in Africa back in those days. So that got to be curious. Never ever seen yourself. Maybe you might have seen yourself in a reflection in the water, but a mirror is more convenient. And that's that can make people vain, because people constantly want to see themselves all over the place now. So it must have something to do with their vanity. But yeah, if you want to take over a place, man, introduce drugs or alcohol. They usually do it.
Whites didn't go into the interior and round up the natives. They waited on the coast for their black partners to bring them black bodies.
Yeah, that you saw in Roots, like they were chasing people down with horses and all kind of stuff, man. Then they can see like these people that have any common sense. We just we didn't know how to ride animals in freaking Africa. We're in Africa, but the only people to see that had access to horses was freaking the white people that came to our land. Like we could ride horses too, but no, they had us just running through the woods and through the fields, being chased by people on horses. I don't think they brought horses on these ships, man. I think if there was horses in Africa, I think that they found them and knew how to ride them. And that's what the thing about it is. And this is what I don't believe. I don't believe in cavemen. I don't believe that crap. I don't. I believe in Adam and Eve, and I believe that God gave us common sense from the beginning. I don't believe we was walking around looking crazy, not being able to understand nothing and talking gibberish, writing on walls and all that goofy stuff. I think that we had common sense from the beginning, that we were created. And that's what they seem to push. And it was Roots that pushed it, a book by a black man that pushed this. That we walking around like being goofy and didn't know how to ride horses or nothing. And why would the white man go through the trouble of trying to train horses so they could go hunt black people when they could just have them brought to the docks and just put on the ships? Just find some black people to do it, because believe it or not, black people do throw other black people under the bus. I'm sure if you're black in America, you've seen it. It happens. And when they're rich enough, they will throw other black people under the bus. And I believe that's what happened in Africa back then. They threw their own people under the bus and sold them for alcohol and a mirror. I'm sure for other things too, but you know what I'm saying, right? So no, I think it was a lot of lies and Roots. And the sad part is, and this is what make me think it's an agenda, because he was a historian, I believe. He researched black people specifically, and you tell me he didn't know none of this stuff? I believe he did know it, and he just didn't put it into his book or movies. Oh, I haven't read his book. Maybe he do have it in his book, but they definitely didn't put it in the movies. And the fact about it is, either he had no control over those things, or he decided he wanted to edit that out. And I believe it was an agenda because they pushed it in our schools for some reason. So yeah, it's crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff.
Dark reality is that our lives had very little value to our ancestors. Here's the third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700,000 slaves in Africa today, right now. That's the lowest estimate that I could find. Other sources say there are many more. For context, that's almost twice as many slaves as were ever brought to the United States. Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor, these are the conditions that currently exist within the same sub-Saharan region where the transatlantic slave trade originated.
Yeah, it's still happening. Human trafficking is happening all over the world, man. I mean, that Freedom movie that came out, child trafficking. I mean, it's happening all over the world. I mean, we do it differently sometimes. I'm sure it's a lot different than when Africans were being traded or when Egypt were enslaving Hebrews. I'm like, it's the same thing, man. As long as there are rich people, it's always going to be the underclass, always. And they always going to be most likely in a servant role. That's the way it always been. They might change the name, they might change the procedure, do it differently. Money might change differently. Instead of, gold, it turns to cash, and then it turns to digital, what have you, crypto. I mean, either way, it always existed. And even though she said that white people did end it, I don't believe they completely end it, for one, and I believe they still benefit in some ways. Yes, white people probably didn't don't have slavery in their countries anymore, but somehow they benefited. They found a way to benefit from it either way. If there's slavery in another country and they think they can, and they people getting treated like garbage, I'm sure America will figure out a way to somehow benefit from it. Always follow the money, always.
African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then, and no, they are not being purchased by any country of white men. In fact, slavery, by any traditional definition, is exclusively practiced today within non-white countries.
Like I said, it might be outright slavery in these countries, but white people, I'm not saying all white people, I'm just talking about people that benefit from it. You follow the money. What they do is they can buy organs, or they can just pay other countries. Since they already got slaves anyway, they can just pay other countries to get stuff done for a cheaper price. Like, you hit a sweatshops. You hear all these things, right? Nike shoes and outfits. They instead of having manufacturing in this country, they just pay another country because it's cheaper. They got like slave wages over there, So white countries might not be purchasing slaves, but that doesn't mean they're not going to take advantage of slavery happening in other places. Again, follow the money. So I do agree with this statement, but I think she left out that specific point from this particular situation.
But we hear almost nothing about that. Just like we hear nothing about how slavery was universal until good people in Europe and America ended it 2 centuries ago. Why? Because our so-called leaders, black and white, wouldn't profit from it. Black victimhood is nothing if not profitable. It elects politicians and funds racial grievance groups.
I agree with that. It's profitable to keep people divided, especially black people. Black people seem to be the easiest people to deceive for some reason. It's like, even when I'm talking about that through experience. I talk to black people. I'm like, look, man, I had these arguments lots of the times. You can't, why hold on to this? You weren't a slave back then. If you're going to complain about anything, complain about what's going on now. Complain about your wages or your housing situation. Okay, if you're going to complain about it, complain about that. But to keep going back talking about slavery in Africa and reparations, not going to happen. We can barely get any money for anything we want. I mean, now, if the government want to give me free money, yeah, I'm going to take it. Do I believe that it should happen? In a more successful and giving society, it would be nice, but it's not going to happen because economically sound is just not going to happen. It's not possible. And the fact that a lot of black people are sitting around waiting for this is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Concentrate on what's going on right now with your life and try to improve it from this point. So instead of keep talking about this, and there's a lot of race hustlers out there, man, that's trying to get paid, man. Don't matter what truths come out, no matter what happens, they want you to believe all white people are out to get you. And that's not true. back in the day when I was younger, I was pushed into that way of thinking, and whenever I came across white people, which I didn't see that much, but when I did, I started to be suspicious. But it started to leave me, I believe, when I hit high school, when they was taking away segregation. They was like trying to mix black people with white people, which I thought it was a good thing in my opinion. I did want to go to another black school because I was only used to going to black schools at the time. But when they mixed us, and I finally started to get to know white people more, then hey, I started to realize maybe what I was being taught wasn't true. And then when I left the country, then I started to really understand it, because I started to meet white people in other places. People are different. Individuals are different. But they trying to make it seem like don't matter what white person you meet, they're going to try to take advantage of you, treat you like garbage, call you the N-word, all these things. Doesn't matter. Just hate them. And the funny thing is other white people telling you this stuff too. And why black people can't make this connection, man, that it's like, why are white people telling you to hate other white people? Why did that make sense? It doesn't make sense unless they have some type of agenda. Please think for yourself. If nothing else, if that's not enough, do research. Look into the world, man. See what's going on. And then just make a decision then. Now, if you want to live that way, fine, live that way. But don't expect all black people to agree with you.
And if Black Americans began to view themselves as partners in the American dream, if we embraced the patriotic spirit that holds all men are created equal, the patriotic spirit that is our real heritage, and the race hustlers would soon be out of business. And who wants that? I'm Candice Owens.
Yeah, she's right about that. These race hustlers, man, they've been lying to us for years. I mean, even when I was going to church when I was a kid, man, I would see relatives and other people, how much they say they love the Lord. And I'm not saying they didn't love the Lord. I'm not trying to take that away from them. But then in the same breath, they tell you how much they hate white people. And I'm like, shouldn't you love everybody? And isn't that what God said? But for some reason, they couldn't stand white. I mean, I had relatives that hated white people. I was like, it's like I never had any personal situations where I wanted to hate all white people. It might have been an individual that I didn't like, but it never made me want to say I hated all white people. But it was always constantly pushed on me to hate all white people. Not just only by some family members, also by the school, also by, now the internet telling you to do it. I mean, everybody wanted to tell you to hate white people for some reason. And I think that's wrong. And the sad part is a lot of white people feel so guilty that they feel like they have to constantly prove that they're not racist. Constantly. How can you live like that? I don't meet white people now and be sitting there thinking, oh, this person racist as soon as I meet them. I did when I was younger because I rarely knew white people back then when I was growing up. I didn't know them. I rarely saw them. They didn't come in our neighborhood. Whenever they came in our neighborhood, they were doing something. They were trying to buy a house or trying to sell you something or maybe Jehovah's Witness or something like that, right? But other than that, I didn't see white people. I hung out with black folks constantly. And then when I went to the school, I started to get to know white people more. I started to understand them. That's when I started to learn about a little bit about hard rock and heavy metal and all this other stuff. Starting to see the culture of white people. I was like, oh, a little shocked. But, after a while, I started to realize something. They were not much different than us. And that we could talk about the same stuff, comic books, music, or whatever. They were not that much different than us. And then when I left the country, I met a whole bunch of white people. Went to Germany, for crying out loud. So that's white people right out there. But they didn't act like American white people. They acted differently. They spoke a different language, of course, but they acted differently as well. And I might have run into maybe one, possibly two situations where I didn't get along with some Germans. But other than that, man, I got treated well down there. Matter of fact, I feel like I got treated better in Germany than I did in America. So it's like all this stuff. What get me about black people is I understand if you raised not to believe certain things when you're young. But after seeing the world from growing up and watching the news and, the right stuff and doing research and watching documentaries and just opening your eyes, it had to be a little bit more complex than I just hate white people. And I see a lot of black people I hate white people. I'm like, for what context? Why do you hate all white people? I mean, if one white person treated you like crap and you hate that person, I can at least understand that. But why are you hating all white people? And why are you attacking white people? Why are you cursing them out or doing all these things to them? For what? Because somebody told you to? It's almost like a lot of our people don't think for ourselves. And we also cause our own problems too. We can't blame everybody else for our problems that we cause. You see it in a lot of these big cities. Chicago, New York, Jersey. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, man. And I remember having an argument with this guy I used to work with. It was another black guy. I was saying, because he was talking about white people too, and white people out to kill you and all these things. And I was like, what? I got hurt more by black people than I do any other race. And that's true. Most white people got hurt by other white people, and most black people got hurt by more black people. It happens that way because these are the people you're around the most. So you're going to have conflicts. Just like in Africa, I'm sure they would. That's the reason why they sold their own people. They ain't had nobody else to sell, so they sold their own people. They attacked their own people. They killed their own people. I mean, it happens. So it's like, I just don't want to live that way, especially ever since I became a Christian. I definitely knew I didn't want to live that way anymore. And I won't. I want to die with a clean conscience. I want to die loving the Lord. I want to die loving people as much as I'm able to love them. And I'm not going to put nobody over another person. If I marry a black woman, great. If I marry an Asian woman, great. If I marry a white woman, great. I just hope that she loves the Lord and that she loves me. That's all that's important to me. And if I have any children, them too, of course. But that's all I need. That's all I need. I don't know where the world is going, what's happening, or anything like that. But I do know this, that I'm not going to sit around hating white people 24 hours a day. I'm not going to do it. And I forgot that she did work at PragerU before she did the Daily Wire, which is interesting. So this is an old video. So if it came out, I never heard about this video before. And now that people are watching it recently, tells me one thing. A lot of people are starting to question what's going on these days. Maybe they're starting to question a lot of this racist stuff now. Because I'm hearing a lot of black people are becoming conservative. Maybe that's the reason why they're watching a lot of these videos. Interesting. All right. I really appreciate all of you coming by. Thanks again. And this is my second channel that I'm posting on it. That doesn't mean I totally abandoned my first channel. I still post things on that channel too. So please go to that channel as well. But please help me build a subscriber base on this channel because I do got 2 strikes on the other one. So please help me out. Okay. Because I want to make both of these channels strong. And if you have any requests or comments or anything, please leave it in the comments below. I really would appreciate it because I do read all my comments and I do reply. Okay. All right. Thanks again for stopping by. This is T, and peace.